Welcome to the Behind the Wind podcast. I'm Lauren Lane. For over 50 years, the LSI team has been dedicated to the science of business development. We've seen the impact of our work and how it's evolved into economic development and now social impact work. This week, Sean sits down with Admiral Alan Reyes, who serves as the Chief Operating Officer at the United Service Organizations, or USO. They're going to discuss military life, deployments and sacrifices, the USO's evolution and resilience programs, and how to best support military spouses in employment. Let's jump in.
Well, Admiral Reyes, please, as we start, maybe you could just tell your story and your history with the Navy, and which is in of itself an amazing story. And then I really would love to talk about what the USO is doing today. And I mean, it's just that's an amazing story.
No, well, thanks, Sean. First, thanks for having me on your podcast. You know, I really would have to start with my journey in the Navy started well before I was actually in the Navy myself. I will tell you, my father, who immigrated from the Philippines to enlist in the Navy to earn his citizenship and to make a better life for himself and his family, met me for the first time when I was about 3 months old, because he had just returned from a deployment on board his submarine back in the late 60s. And like a lot of other sailors today and yesteryear, have had to come home after many, many months away from their family to meet their children for the first time. And so, you know, my journey with the Navy started way back then when I was, you know, let's call it a junior member of my military family. And, you know, with a father who served and his wife, and in the Navy, we would all often say how true that the hardest job in the Navy is that of a Navy spouse. But, you know, that was the start of my journey in the Navy as a kid growing up in a military family. And like a lot of other kids, moved around from place to place every 2-3 years, having to rebuild relationships or start new relationships anew, new schools, new friends. You know, it's a very challenging life for a military family. And then you add on top of that, certainly the strife of multiple deployments and what we're seeing today, potential conflict for our service members and families. I grew up in a military family like that, but also grew up very, very indebted, a lot of gratitude, especially understanding my family's roots in the Philippines and the opportunities that we have had as a family because of the opportunity to serve in the U.S. Navy, that my dad and many other folks from across the globe have immigrated to the United States to be able to serve in our military and to use that service as a means to gain their citizenship and become part of this wonderful, wonderful society and economy and community that we have here in the United States. So with that gratitude, I, said, hey, I'm going to go and figure out a way to serve myself.
Did you always know you wanted to serve in the Navy?
I will tell you, I thought in younger days, I thought maybe I'd go off to law school or something like that. I don't know. It would be the function of whatever TV show was on at the time that said, hey, I'm going to do something. And maybe, LA Law was on. And I said, yeah, I'll be a lawyer. But, and then something about the Foreign Service. But I actually, when I was in high school, and I was in high school when my father was posted to an overseas Navy base in Rota, Spain. And so I was immersed in this military community. And I was in high school as a sophomore. An alum, a recent grad from my high school, it came home on Christmas break from his college, his freshman year in college, to visit with his family who was still there. And he happened to be a freshman at the Naval Academy out of Annapolis, Maryland. And he came home, with such an impressive guy. His name's Rodney Urbano, just for the record. And he really got me interested by his example in not only attending the Naval Academy, but starting my own service in the Navy. And really, then it really started clicking for me that this was part of this journey that I've been on and that my family's been on as part of the military. So I really kind of first, Sean, thought about the military when I was in high school, and mainly because of that Naval Academy opportunity to attend the Naval Academy. So, yeah.
So you end up going to the Naval Academy, and talk a little about that experience, which that's amazing.
Yeah. No, I tell you, I feel so fortunate to have been able to go to one of our service academies. All of them are great. I'm partial to Navy and Annapolis, of course. But it was a great opportunity for me personally. The school brings together all these wonderful, undergrad students as cadets or midshipmen at the Naval Academy. Great education, great opportunities to, participate in athletics. But more importantly, it's a leadership laboratory, right? You spend 4 years learning about leadership and hopefully imbuing you as an individual leader with some of those qualities to be a good leader when you, as we say in the Navy, hit the fleet. And so my time at the Naval Academy, oftentimes people say Annapolis is a great place to be from, but maybe not a great place to be. I mean, it was a pretty intense experience, right? Not a lot of college kids are, spending their days, particularly as a freshman or really all 4 years, in a very regimented military discipline kind of environment. But it was what I needed in my life. It was helping me focus my abilities on, leading teams, whether it was, in the classroom or in the clubs or on the field. And then that translated to the ability to serve in the fleet as a junior officer. But I will tell you, the Naval Academy, I'm still, it's an amazing, I think everybody to a certain extent, with their groups, their fellow alums, whether it's from high school or college or otherwise, you stay in touch with people through the years. And I've found that my Naval Academy heritage, my friends, my classmates, are amongst my closest confidants in my life. And it's because of that close knit team that you pull together to go through a pretty difficult time together at a formative time of your life. And so the Naval Academy experience was one I would never trade for anything. I will tell you, meeting some of the midshipmen and cadets today, I would have never been able to get into that place today because they're so incredibly bright and brilliant. And, I will tell you, Sean, and I hope folks on your podcast listeners also appreciate this, that talking to some of these young men and women gives you great confidence about where we are headed as a society and the leaders and the young leaders that we'll have not only to lead in our military, but, to move on from that and to lead in other corporate and civic and other fields to be, to keep us moving forward.
I couldn't agree more. And I've spent a lot of time in all of the academies, and I do have a special place in my heart for the Naval Academy, which you are exactly right. Those kids in those programs are the best and brightest in America. There's no question. And then I often hear this same thing that for your life, forever, you have this brotherhood, sisterhood that is unbreakable and just so special. Unlike a lot of the universities, and not to say that there's not great institutions out there, but there is something special about those academies that. And the kids that are going into these programs are the best and brightest in the U.S.
They absolutely are. And I'm living here in the Washington, D.C. area, and I get to go up to Annapolis now and then. And again, seeing some of those young leaders evolve and learn, and it's funny, right? I mean, I was many years ago, I'm 32, 33 years ago when I graduated from that institution. And, that time has passed by very quickly, certainly talking about my time in the Navy, but, watching them and interacting with some of those young men and women just gives you a lot of pride. And I am also a fan of all the service academies too, except, on certain days of the year when we're playing football against each other.
And how do you feel about Notre Dame this year?
Oh my gosh. Well, I will tell you, I had a lot of friends saying, hey, let's go out to Ireland. Let's go to Dublin and attend this game. And there were so many friends and classmates that were out there. And I was like, well, I'm not really sure we're going to do that well. I'm not sure how much a good time that's going to be, but it's, it was a little bit of a drumming, to say the least. Right. But I will say this too about Naval Academy or Service Academy football, not the most exciting stuff to watch. I will be honest. And I think some of my friends on the Naval Academy athletics might be mad at me for saying something like that. My interest in any of the service academies is just watching, the young men on that field or any of the sports, any of the intercollegiate sports that our midshipmen and cadets play in, and knowing that, particularly like at, Navy Air Force, that was another one that was pretty bad this year for us at Navy. And, we'll go up to Boston this year and play Army versus Navy in December. and the kids on the field will do their best and fight as hard as they can for the win and to sing second, as we say in the Naval Academy or in academy traditions. But all those young athletes will be hitting the fleet or hitting the Army or hitting the Air Force or any of our services, and they will be playing on a bigger and more important team. And it's kind of it inspires you to watch them on that field.
People ask me all the time, they know I love sports. What is the most incredible sporting event you've ever been to? Without question, the Army-Navy game. There's nothing like it. The history, the pageantry, the leadership that is there, usually from the president all the way down to the undersecretaries, are all there for that Army-Navy game, and there's nothing like it. So I totally agree. So you graduate from the Naval Academy and then decide this is going to be your career. Was that your thought, or did you think, okay, I'm going to serve my time and do something else?
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, back then I thought, hey, I was going to stay on active duty, the whole ride. I really wanted to be in the service, and I had a great time, and felt like I made a difference as an active duty service member in the Navy. And graduating in 1990, and for 8 years serving on active duty, I did some really great things, serving on board a fast attack submarine, being able to come back here to the DC area and see some of the, how big Navy kind of operates and be part of that. But it was also, a time where I thought, hey, I was graduating, or I was, by the time I was 8 years in, it was the late 90s. And back then there was this whole, the Berlin Wall had come down.
We won the Cold War.
The Cold War had ended, and this idea, the .com economy was booming. And so it was like, hey, there might be other ways to, climb some new hills and, some new adventures and some new, do some different things. And so there was also some personal family things that drove me to say, hey, look, I was serving on active duty. I've done a really some good work here. But I think there's some other things to do. And, and I will say also just, I had at that time had a young family myself, and being as I said earlier, being part of a military family is hard. Right. And, I found, there were some challenges in separation and with children and with, extended family. And those are some of the same things that our troops and their families face today. Right. So I thought that was another, I made a personal decision to transition out of the service and go into the corporate world, and then also, but it was kind of a nucleus for me, right? My foundational time, both as a member of a military family, but then as a active duty service member myself, kind of helped keep in the forefront of my mind our society's obligation really to take care of service members and families. And one of the reasons I'm here at the USO,
We, as you and I have talked about, we've spent the last almost 20 years now really focusing on the needs of the military spouse and specifically military spouse employment. And over the years, we have met with and talked with a lot of the member spouses and how difficult military life can be. And, we hear this over and over. This is the life we chose. We knew this is what we were getting into. And we've heard a lot of just heart-wrenching and also inspiring stories by the military spouses. Could you just talk for a minute about what it was like serving as the member, being separated from your family and your kids? Because I'll tell you, our team is so focused on that military spouse, but I'd love for, our constituents to hear about how, I know this is your job. I know this is what you signed up for, but how it was raising a young family and also being committed to your career as a service member.
Yeah, it's a great question, Sean. It's a great conflict too for us in the service, right? On the one hand, right? I mean, and I think our service members subscribe to this, what I'm about to say, right? I mean, we are in uniform to be a deterrent, right? To ensure that, we ensure world peace and national security because we do have such a strong military and that we are ready to fight and we are ready to be a lethal force if needed. And so that deterrence is important, but being able to be that deterrent, you have to be able to do your job. You have to be trained and you can execute on those missions. So even whether it's in peacetime or wartime, you are spending, your entire time to be focused on that readiness and that lethality. And you have a certain sense of pride that you can do that job. And in order to do that job, you have to go far forward and you have to be deployed to far reaches of the world, the globe, away from your family and from your friends. And so that's an interesting challenge, right? Because you want to be as good at your job as possible because the country depends on you and your unit and your service to do that. But in order to do that, you have to make some sacrifices, and your family has to make some sacrifices. So it pulls apart at you a little bit. If you're asking sort of from the personal military service member's perspective, I can tell you maybe just, we call them sea stories in the Navy. So I'll tell you a little sea story. A couple of them actually. But so I still remember and I mentioned my service on board a fast attack submarine when I was first a young ensign in the Navy, my early few years in the Navy, and my first deployment away from my young family. And we were, we were stationed out of Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, and we went west. And like a lot of other ships, we were deployed to the Western Pacific and then also into the Persian Gulf, with everything going on over there. And we had pulled into port in Saudi Arabia, and I hope no offense taken by anybody from Saudi Arabia, but we were in a place called Port Adamam, which was a very, very not a place that sailors were going to feel very welcome for a lot of reasons. And so it was like, I was in the middle of deployment. We'd been months and months away from home. We were in a place where it was just not very, welcoming, just to put it that way. And, I was dealing with a lot of things because, our commanding officer was pounding on me for a bunch of things. And I get back to my, my stateroom on the ship and accidentally break the frame and the picture of my family that was in my room. And it really wasn't an accident. I wasn't throwing it anywhere. Just kind of like it fell out of my desk, right? And seeing that physical image of my family through this cracked frame, really, I broke down. I started crying. I felt such an emotional sadness because I was halfway around literally on the other side of the globe from my family and could not talk to them, could not engage with that, could not help support them. And I felt a personal feeling of guilt there a little bit, because I was the one making this decision to say, hey, I want to be this service member. I want to be far forward and serve my country and protect our national security. But at the same time, I'm taking myself out of the picture for the people I care about most. And so as service members, I think we've dealt with that in time immemorial, right? And our service members today, we have, what's going on, particularly in places like Ukraine and now in Israel and in Gaza. That only adds to the operational tempo for our service members, and therefore it also adds to the stress of those families back home.
I appreciate you sharing that. And like I said, I think as an organization, we have focused so much on the impact that deployment and training and all, this military life has on the military spouse and the children. And I don't want us to ever forget that there's these parents that are in harm's way and away from their children and away from their spouse and sacrificing a lot, not just their personal safety, but financial, emotional, all of these challenges that we cannot forget that the member is facing as well. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
So you joined you decide you're going to leave the Navy, and I mean, what drew you to the USO? I mean, I think, I think there's no one better to be in your position than, especially listening to your story, 3 generations of military members, and your commitment to the military as a family.
Yeah. Well, I will tell you. So, leaving active duty, I never thought I would put the uniform back on again. Right? Again, we were talking end of Cold War, peace dividend. let's go build this .com economy, right? And then as you and I, Sean, and probably some folks, in our sort of age group know about the dot bomb, right? Things started, the things fell out of the bottom. And then also, tragic experience on 9/11 of 2001. And on September 12th, 2001, I called the reserve recruiter and said, hey, I'd like to come back in. I'd like to do my part. And so I tell that story because this leads up to sort of how I got to the USO. And so I joined the reserves, came back into service again on September 12th, 2001. I called the recruiter and began a journey that hundreds of thousands of our fellow Americans, are on as reservists. They spend part of their time in uniform, but they're spending their full time as a member of another company, working in corporate America, raising a family, all of that, right? So a constant juggling. And as part of that juggling, and certainly during, the operations in places like Iraq and Afghanistan, we called in a lot of our reservists to do work, including me. And so I deployed multiple times as a reservist away from not only we just talked about our families, right? But you also now, as a reservist, are deploying away from your company, the people that you work with, your teammates who depend on you. And there are great companies, and I know LSI is one of them that is so supportive of our military. And they're willing to have that, that pause in your service to that company to go and serve in the military. But you can only do that so many times before it really kind of wears you down as an employer, right? And long story short, I got to a point where I was doing so much with the Navy and the reserves that it was having an impact on my career at the company I was at the time, which made perfect sense. I get a call that, hey, there's this opportunity to serve in an operational role at the USO. Are you interested? And as a military member myself, and honestly, really more during my reserve career, because as a Navy reservist, you're not serving on board ships, what most people might think, right? But as a Navy reservist, you're actually doing more work with other services. In particular, in my specialty in logistics, we were working ashore with Army brethren, with Marine Corps brethren, with Air Force colleagues as well. And so, it was more of a joint environment, but also an opportunity for me to operate and forward bases where there was not only a multi-service presence, but also the USO had a lot of interaction there. And so knowing that there was this organization out there that made a difference to people in uniform and to their families, I answered that call. And, I came here to the organization at the time. The CEO was a gentleman by the name Sloan Gibson. Sloan, great man. He's a West Point grad, so I don't hold that against him. But he was the man that took a bet on me. Took the risk on hiring me in as his operations guy. And this was now in 2011, I think, when I joined the USO. And we were again just on the back end, or certainly in the maybe not the complete back end, but Operation Iraqi Freedom, Operation Enduring Freedom. Those had been going for a long time, and we as the USO had been stepping up our game. We had been doing a lot in the places like the Middle East, but really across the Pacific and here in the U.S. because of the great support that the military experienced as part of, the post 9/11 world. I think, there is, again, you don't want and wish these kinds of conflicts and wars on anyone in society, but it does turn the attention of the American public towards our military and says, hey, there's a higher cause out there that we should all support. And, the military, whether it's the service members themselves or their families, are held in really high regard by our society. And so the USO became a much stronger organization in the post 9/11 days than it was during the Cold War. And we were able to use that strength to be deploying the USO wherever we could to support those service members and their families. So, going to the USO was almost the way they call it, a no-brainer for me. It was also an organization that was a strong affinity for the military, obviously. So I could continue my reserve career. And I really have had a great success in that and gratitude to the USO for allowing me to continue to serve in my reserve career, which just ended a year ago. I retired from the Navy and Navy Reserve in October of last year. And, so the bulk of the time I've been here at the USO, I've had to kind of do both jobs. And I was grateful to them for that, but also grateful to be part of an organization that is taking care literally of my family.
When you joined the USO, I think I remember around that time that really the USO was going through transition. It had I think it had, since World War II, had in Vietnam, and really had this branding that when people thought about the USO, they thought about the celebrities and Bob Hope. And talk about the history of the USO, and then this transition that the organization was going through at the time you joined, which was radical.
Yeah, I think that it's a great point. Sean, the USO's roots, our heritage in World War II, to your point about the Bob Hope camp shows and all the work that we did in all the, later conflicts that were really centered around entertainment, really created a brand unto itself for us as an organization, right? And so that was something, and persists today, right? That people see this logo of ours and immediately think about that entertainment avenue. They also think a little bit about, hey, I was going through the airport and I heard, hey, your USO center's here, and they know that about us too. And those are great programs that we deliver. They're important things that we do to support the morale and the comfort of our service members and their families. But in totality, particularly the entertainment, today is a very small part of what we do. And you talk about sort of the evolution of the organization, right? So I'll talk a little bit about that, again, post 9/11, we were able to change our trajectory as an organization in a number of ways. First and foremost, we were really asked and grateful to respond to the need that our service members had all over the world, right? So, we increased our presence on U.S. installations, military installations, both here in the U.S. and overseas. And so, USO centers, which is the bread and butter of what we do at the USO now, 250 locations around the world. I mean, we've grown dramatically. Most of those locations really grown through the last, 15, 20 years of the organization. And, being able to serve in the backyards, in the communities where our service members and their families are living and working and training every day, to provide them, support and wellness programs that will really make them a stronger team. We made a pivot strategically as an organization, I think. And some of it, to be honest, would probably be maybe not so much a intentional pivot, but actually a pivot as the needs were emerging more, that we were going from, hey, we're going to be a morale boosting organization. We're going to bring entertainers to you. We're going to make sure that you're okay on your layover at the airport, to one that's also trying to make an impact on your overall strength and wellness. And how do you do that, right? And where are the different programs and the different parts of the service members and their families' lives where you can do that really effectively? The opportunity to overcome some of those stress is important for us, right? So the term resilience is one that I think it's used a lot. And, our particular definition around resilience is, the ability for an individual to snap back, to overcome or to be prepared for something traumatic that might be happening to them. And we can't think of another part of our community or our society that is potentially going to go through traumatic experiences than the military, whether it's service members or families, right? So for us as a nation, it's important to have a strong military. So, we want to invest in them, in our service members and their families. And as a nonprofit in the society, the USO is also trying to invest in their wellness and their resilience to the programs that we deliver. So yes, our entertainment programming and our airport center programming are contributing to their resilience, but there are other ways, particularly in their communities, on their bases, whether here in the US and overseas, that we can contribute to their resilience. One of the things I would highlight too, in terms of our pivot and our evolution is, and you talk about military spouses, but military spouses and transitioning service members making their way into the corporate America after their service or as their family moving around the country is a very challenging thing for families. Financial wellness is a direct impact on family resilience. And so, those are things that we as the USO know that we have a We have a trusted brand amongst our military, whether it's the individual service member or with the U.S. Military writ large. And we can parlay that brand and that presence in their lives to be able to be one of the ways that we can provide programs and services that will support them in their journey to become, what they're doing next after the military, or in a spouse's case, what they're going to do professionally as they move around from base to base. So it's again, just one of many things that we do here at the USO, but the USO World War II and Bob Hope Camp shows was not doing this. What we're doing today is absolutely part of that overall architecture, all the different types of programs that can deliver that resilience of our service members and their family.
And I'm so excited about what you're doing. I mean, those two initiatives that you talked about, the Military Spouse Employment Initiative and the Transitioning Member Initiative, are so vital to, I believe, both the recruiting and retention of the best military and the best in class members. And I so applaud what you have done to implement the strategy and these initiatives. And maybe we could start just and pull on this thread a bit on military spouse employment. We hear over and over through our work that so many of these families are committed to their service in the military and they just can't afford it. And so many of the social challenges that we see with military families, unfortunately, are related to income, and there really needs, especially at the NCO level, but even at the officer level, that these families need two incomes to survive and live at a level above what we term this TANF level of poverty. And I think that what the USO is doing is a conduit to facilitate military spouses, marrying them to jobs at their, wherever they are, and as they PCS to new assignments, that the USO is there to help them in the transition to a new assignment. Especially, maybe talk about how the USO has implemented this strategy and some of the work that you've been doing at the various installations to support the military spouse employment initiatives. So vital.
Yeah, absolutely, Sean. And, again, it takes me back to my days as a young kid and watching my mom, move from place to place and try to get a job. Now, she was, she's retired now, but she's a registered nurse. And so she had some real opportunities to go from place to place because certifications were fairly, transferable. And there's a lot of other career fields where that's not the case. And that's some of the challenges that we have from a policy perspective, as well as from a way that programs can support folks. But, my appreciation for the challenges for military spouses and their employment really kind of started from that way back then. And I'll pivot that to today. And, I hope she isn't listening, my daughter, who is recently married. I have two. I know I've talked to you about one of them out there in Utah, Sean, right. But my other daughter just recently moved out to Tacoma, Washington with her Army spouse. Again, I'm okay. He's an Army guy, but, she's moved out there and is trying to build her network, trying to look for work as many people do when they move to a new place. And I mentioned to her, we have a USO program out there, what we call our Pathfinder program. And her husband is posted to Joint Base Lewis McChord out there in Washington State. And so we have a USO team out there supporting her. She actually took advantage of their services. And I was just on the phone with her yesterday. She was very giddy about it. She was just excited to have someone there to help them navigate this new territory. Particularly new in a couple of different dimensions. One, obviously, physically, you're in a different geography, but also new. Most of our service members are so young, Generation Z today, that they're new in the workforce. They're learning their way through how do you write that resume? What does your LinkedIn profile need to look like? How do you network with folks? What are the other, how do you prepare for interviews? These are, things that the USO as an organization has been able to capitalize on our strengths to provide those resources. And by the way, we don't necessarily do that all ourselves, right? So, the USO is uniquely positioned to be sort of a convener.
Right.
We have a special relationship with the DoD, with the military, where we can operate our facilities on their bases, and then we can invite through relationships with other nonprofits and other organizations, other folks to be part of this program, so that we can refer transitioning service members and, as you said, military spouses looking for employment to those resources that might be available to them. It could be something as simple as a job posting by employers. It could be programs to help them define what they're looking for, what color their balloon might be, and then also what are the different ways to make them a successful candidate in that transition, and that look for support. And on top of that transition from a military perspective, we're also supporting that military spouse and their family and providing them a transition into this new community. So my daughter was excited about her engagement with the transition specialists at the Pathfinder site, but also with a program we call it the USO, our Coffee Connections, where we bring new spouses together on a regular basis as a convening point at the USO to create bonds and networks and provide them a way to be able to depend on each other for resources. Where's the best place that I can find childcare? What are the best schools here? Those are the type of questions that all families have to deal with when they're moving around. So in a very holistic way, the USO is trying to provide the support to those military spouses as they're making their way from duty station to duty station to duty station. And oh, by the way, when that service member is deployed and the spouse is home and the spouse and the family members are home, we're plugging in with those families as well there. It's not just about what we're doing to take care of those service members overseas. We're taking care of their families while they're back home there as well.
I love it. As you know, and as you and I have talked about, in the last now 2 years since the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act has been passed and implemented, really the focus of IIJA has been creating long-term prosperity and particularly jobs for disenfranchised communities and demographics. And what we have as a company and as a team focused on military spouse employment, what we have advocated and evangelized throughout DOD and the Department of Labor is that there is not a larger disenfranchised demographic than military spouses that are unemployed and have had these challenges related to employment. And working with Secretary Rodriguez in the Department of Labor and Secretary Patricia Barron in OSD, we really have made some great traction, and we're really so excited about this initiative, and as we've talked about, want to partner with the USO on installation-specific military spouse employment initiatives, because I think there is not a better program to ensure long-term recruiting and retention than focusing on the financial stability of the military family, and particularly high-wage employment with military spouse. And what you have done to make that happen is remarkable. And I really think with some of this IIJA focus out of labor, out of OSD, out of even commerce, that we're on the precipice of something really unique and generational. I think that will create this new era of military careers for these members that that our past military executives didn't experience. So really excited about what you're doing. The Pathfinder program is, I think, is just going to increase exponentially with this focus. So I applaud that.
Well, I would return that applause to you, Sean, and to LSI, and to this network, these partnerships that are absolutely fundamental to us to be able to support this important part of our society, the military spouses, and their, our commitment to support them and their families as they serve our nation. And, you mentioned, the great leaders in the various parts of the federal government, and the opportunity to tap into that focus. And, it takes nonprofits like ourselves to be able to support, but also, civic and business leaders like yourself, Sean, that see that as a cause to champion. And I know, like I have traveled the globe, and you don't see that kind of corporate and civic philanthropy and mission focus like we have here in the United States, repeated many very, very few places, if any, in the rest of the world. And that's part of what makes us so strong. And, it's understanding from a corporate perspective that you can both do well and do good at the same time by making sure that you're focusing on the things that matter most to you, as not only as a company, but to the values that you and your employees espouse, right? And so, that kind of commitment is absolutely evident when you see LSI and others focused on this area around military spouse deployment.
Thank you. The other program that you mentioned was the Transitioning Members Program, which really was the genesis of how LSI started going down this path of social impact. And we had an amazing champion, Kristen Cox, who saw the potential of the LSI methodology and really took a chance. She had said, here's a stack of names, 5,000 veterans that are unemployed. What we didn't realize is most of them were homeless and had just tremendous challenges of addiction and PTSD. Most of them were Vietnam veterans and had missed the tech bubble, and it was such a challenging initiative, but we were able to find employment for those 5,000 individuals, and really saw how with a little guidance and a little encouragement that these individuals wanted to succeed. They wanted to do something meaningful and leave a legacy. And I really look back on that time as a special time in our company's history where we changed a lot of lives that were in despair. So talk about the USO's role in member transition and some of the things that you're doing at the USO centers around the world, really.
Yeah. Actually, it's great that you mentioned around the world, right? So, there's roughly 250,000 service members making a transition every year, right? And that's from all over the globe where they may be transitioning. And a bulk of them are the younger generation, having served out one or two enlistment contracts. Certainly you have some that are deploying or transitioning after a full ride, 20 plus years. But the bulk of them are those younger, less experienced, let's say, folks that are moving out into a world that's been foreign to them, right? So you think about a young high school student graduating, going to boot camp, becoming part of the military, learning a trade in the military, and then, making the decision to move on and not really having all the tools that they need to do that. Now, number one, I will tell you, and I think you know this too, the military, the services are doing their level best to provide programs that help them in that transition. And that's a generational change. In generations past, oh, you're getting out? You're dead to me. You're going to get the worst duty. We're going to crank everything out of you as best we can before you're out the door. And that just, that was sort of the old think, right? About how do you serve, but that's changed, right? The military, more nuanced, more understanding of what you said earlier, right? That, taking care of your people has a huge impact on both recruitment and retention. And so if you're not taking care of your folks, even, through the follow through of them making the transition out, you're really not really take care of them at all. So the military is doing their best. But now the USO, we want to make sure that we are an enabler. We're not competing with, U.S. military provided transition programs. We want to augment them, and we want to be a way to convene, as I said earlier, other organizations, whether they're private companies, whether they're other fellow nonprofits, universities, what have you, other places to provide that resources for those service members as they're making their decision on how to get out. We do this initially by doing what we call a get-centered interview. We provide a way for them to provide an inventory, if you will, of the things that they think they want to do as they move forward in their lives. And then we can use that to help kind of shape a very tailored, what we call an action plan for that service member to say, hey, is it an employment prep that I need to do? Am I looking for educational work? Let me make sure I understand what my VA benefits are so that I can make sure that to get everything that I'm entitled to. A number of other categories that we provide this holistic plan to that service member. And so that helps give them a plan for success. And I think that's one of the areas that we make a big difference is it's really trying to create a tailored individual solution as opposed to, in the military, because of just the size and the scope of the military, they need to provide a one-to-many approach. And we come in with a one-to-one approach to make sure that individual service member, and again, transition and spouses in many cases have that roadmap for their own individual success. So we convene a lot of great partners to be able to do that. And that happens, either hyper locally at an installation, but more importantly, it happens more broadly across literally the globe. And so one thing I will tell you, making a transition out of the service is hard, number one. But, we have a couple hundred, thousand service members deployed, living overseas at any given time, right? They're there as part of their service and their families are there as part of the service. And some people make their transition out of the service from those places. And, that adds exponentially to the challenges. So I mentioned that because our USO program, which started really very much grassroots at a local installation, has now, because of technology and because of the great leadership we have on our team here, to more of a global capability. And so you don't necessarily need to go into the physical presence of a, USO transition office on a base. You can plug into our resources digitally and make sure that you've got what you may be moving back home, so to speak, as opposed to where you are today. And you need resources that are going to help you succeed in your transition back there. So I think one of the neat, one of the really good sort of attributes of our program is because of our presence and our scale around the globe, we really are a means to access for our service members and their families and networks that will help them wherever they may go.
I just absolutely love what you're doing, and we're really excited to be connected with the USO and your work. It really aligns with a lot of our work, and I think that collaborating on some of these initiatives, we're going to do some great things together in the coming years. Admiral Reyes, what you've done at the USO, I just commend work, and we will link everything in this episode. But I would encourage those listening to donate to the USO. You can just go on uso.org and there's opportunities to donate. You have 30,000 volunteers, which we didn't talk about. Managing an army of 30,000 volunteers in of itself is just maybe that's another episode that we should talk about. Yeah. I mean, one of the largest volunteer organizations in America, 30,000 volunteers in the USO, and maybe that's even conservative. And the impact that you continue to have now in over the 70th year of the USO is just so incredible. And thank you for your work. As we close up, tell me what you do when you're not working for the USO. What do you do for fun and, to get your mind off of some of the challenges of the organization?
Yeah, I have to admit, I thrive on sort of the work that we do here. So I probably work more than I should and try to find ways to balance that.
Sometimes I think that's our generation. That's our generation.
Yeah, I tell you, I like to travel. So, it's in my roots. It's almost, it's almost like a half answer, right? Because on the one hand, I'm traveling a lot for my USO work. I used to travel a lot in my Navy work, but I try to travel now again, with family. I try to see different parts of the world. Try to understand this great big world that we're a part of, and so I like to go and visit different places, both here in the U.S. and overseas. We have these things that are called books that I try to pick up now and then. It's kind of funny, right? In this digital world where everything's about a podcast or about a webinar or about streaming video, try to read some books and just finished a really good historical perspective on World War II, a book about that. So I try to keep myself read. It's Ian Toll is the name of the author. He wrote 3 very large volumes that is a really great historical accounting of World War II. And I'd recommend that to anybody that wants to understand it. And we haven't even talked about this, but certainly thinking about, understanding our past helps us kind of determine, the decisions we can make to ensure our future, right? So those are good things to do. The other thing I do is I try to get as much FaceTime as I can with those two wonderful kids of mine that are now halfway around the world as military spouses themselves, right? So that's the other thing I do.
Well, Admiral Reyes, when you're in Salt Lake, please let me know. I know that Mayor Mendenhall would love to meet with you, and I'd love to see you outside of Hill Air Force Base, and look forward to our next meeting. Thank you so much for making this time, and it was just, like I said, I cannot commend you enough for the work you're doing and your commitment to our military families. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Sean. Thanks to you and your colleagues and teammates at LSI for your support of our military. Very much. Thank you.
Take care.